Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining me here today. I'm Nick Rohn, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for a conversation with Kyle Wedberg, PhD Senior Manager for the Government Finance Officers Association. But before we get to Kyle, we just want to thank all our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members for helping make programming like this possible. And we'd love to work with anyone out there who's watching this program and maybe doesn't know what the ALN can offer for their members, but please reach out. And we would love to partner with every organization in the world, and we think we can bring some value. So with that, we'll just say we have some upcoming events. Next week is the Water Asset Leadership Series Roundtable panel with the Palm Beach County, Florida water and wastewater. We have a number of panelists speaking from that. And they're the first ISO 55000 certified water utility in the US. And so we've been trying to talk to them for some time, and we're really excited they finally will join us next week at this same time on ALN Thursday at 3. And after that, the series continues with an EPA water asset management framework discussion, and the panel is still pending on that. But we, as you can see, and then the final session for that water asset leadership series is on AI, asset management water assessment, where Mentor APM, one of our organizational members, is going to showcase a new technology application that they have developed. So an exciting lineup. And Kyle, I believe, is here today to talk to us about another upcoming event. But before we get to that, Mike Bordenero, Executive Director, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, Kyle is here to talk about a program that the ALN is supporting the Government Finance Officers Association with on asset management policy. And Kyle, welcome back.
Thanks, sir. It's nice to be here.
And extend our sympathies to your city and your community for the tragedies that occurred on New Year's, and wish you the best going forward with that. Kyle is in New Orleans. The GFOA is headquartered in Chicago, serves the United States and North America. And before you tell us a little bit about the GFOA, you've been on here before, and we've talked with you about your journey in asset management. Kyle is also on the ISO 55000 US Technical Advisory Group, and you recently got your PhD. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, that would be an extension of how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey.
Sure. And thank you, Michael. It's always just so wonderful to be able to have these conversations. I think, just a little on the GFOA side. I'm a former member of GFOA through my journey as a government finance professional, and came to work about 3 years ago here with the Government Finance Officers Association. We're supporting government finance officers across the entire suite of the finance divisions for cities, counties, parishes, states, any of the service utilities, which sometimes for the ALN is actually as of now more germane because there's a lot of separate districts that are running sewer, water, aviation kind of infrastructure. And so we have about 25,000 members across the country. We are working right now in a membership model to think about how we expand that, because with the 25,000 members we've got a lot of the C-suite, we've got a lot of the executives, but we want to reach down and find people earlier in their careers. I know by the time I got to a place where I was deputy CFO and CFO and running organizations, I didn't actually have time to avail myself of a lot of the work that we do at GFOA. We teach a lot of classes, we do a lot of webinars and policy work. One of which we will be doing in a couple weeks together on the 29th, which I'm very excited about. We're going to be doing some conversations between the American Society of Civil Engineers, the practitioner group out of Denver that is doing work in transportation, and Mike at the ALN, and having this conversation about what does it look like to bring these international standards to bear. So we would love to get people earlier in their career to begin thinking about having these conversations, and we're going to push that out into the world through a little revamp of our membership structure. So younger members of government, younger meaning in their careers, not in spirit or in age, but younger in their careers, can avail themselves of this. I'll tie that into the question you asked. I was a multi-decade practitioner in government, had been running finance offices, and actually my last position in government was as the CEO of a state agency, and was running that for about 14 years when I decided that I wanted to go back and sharpen my tools. So I did what every sane person in their 40 does, which is go back and get their PhD. I had a fantastic experience. It was a cohort model, which is not typical in PhD programs. So got to do that work with a fixed group of people across the coursework, and then of course the dissertation.
A
Um,
cohort model. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so the way that they did the work was they brought a group of us in together. We were all at varying levels of experience, and they termed it more of an executive PhD. But in all actuality, what it was a bunch of us that were in careers and in jobs doing this work together. So we took all the classes together. So it made group work
Mm.
and studying and those kinds of things less of a logistical maelstrom, which it can be at times. If for all of you who have a memory of being an adult, a working adult, and going to class, the hardest part is the logistics. The life logistics get really difficult. Carving out the 5 to 6 hours to do the assignments, to have the conversations, to do the group work. So they'd bring us together once a month. It was a little bit like being in the reserves. They'd bring us together once a month, and then we would work in between classes. And so I had these 18 incredible individuals that I got to walk the program with. And a typical PhD program spits you out at the end of coursework to then do and finish your dissertation. Ours, we were doing them at the same time. We were working on our dissertation as we were doing our coursework, which I would recommend to no one because that was incredibly complicated and heavy in terms of workload. But as we got into it, I started to look at, my dissertation was on fiscally distressed cities. I did a study of 3 here in Louisiana. And when cities fall into distress, it's not happening all at one time, right? This is not a 1 day act or a single point in time act. And everything fails. It's not one thing that fails. And so, the story of the infrastructure of these cities, from a water, sewer, roads, the infrastructure around public safety and services, it all erodes across time. And any community in this country that has gotten to the place of fiscal distress has passed through some austerity moment where they cut and cut and cut provision of services for the citizens that remain. They're very complicated in terms of the path that gets them there. It's not a single point. But it's one of the things that I saw that I think there's also this spiral that happens. If you are not providing good services for citizens, those citizens start to leave, and as the citizens start to leave, the tax base starts to erode, and as the tax base erodes, you can provide less services for citizens, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy at some level. So I think, part of my walk into really having some depth and belief in asset management is I think it's actually a really good bellwether. It's indicative of whether you're taking care of the whole, whether the community is healthy, whether it is safe and has a good sense of the level of service it's trying to provide for its citizens, and then following through on those commitments through the manifestation of good services as it relates to the infrastructure, because a capital plan and the infrastructure that it provides, those are simply the systems through which we deliver goods and services. And those are the systems through which we provide programming for citizens. And those are the systems through which we provide ways for the private sector to function in those same regards. And so if we don't have good systems, then the programs, the provision of services, and the quality and level of life services relative to the quality of life get compromised, and that's for the public and the private sector. And so I think there's a incumbent responsibility on government to take care of these things. And honestly, one of the things that I've also come to believe in the asset management walk for governments is that oftentimes you have stewards of these resources in the public sector that will be there for 15, 20 years. I've had a 20 plus year career in government. The people that are going to stay are the ones that are working in the finance shops. They're working in the public works shops. They're working in the department of fill in the blank, transportation, fire, police. And they're committed to this work. And the people that are at the elected levels or at the appointed levels at the top of organizational charts, and we're having this moment at the federal level right now, change. They change every 4 to 8 years. They change with some rapidity and some regularity. And so giving the tools to the team that is going to manage this and be the stewards of these long term is really important. Because as the electeds and the appointeds change up top, there's going to be a change in desires and a change in motivations and a change in priorities. And so as those motivations and priorities shift, you're going to have changes in terms of what people want to deliver. And often cases, those can be large dollar, big ticket items that can eat up a lot of what is available to do asset renewal, asset maintenance, and take care of the assets you already own. So one of the things I really believe and hope that governments here as we work with them is to not be passive, but to be active in the management of the assets that already exist in their communities, but also to positively prejudice, to think about those assets going first before you add new assets to the inventory. I will say to anyone who will listen, and I say it in the classes I teach, the single most expensive addiction in all of government is the cutting of ribbons. The desire to open something new is a very expensive longitudinal commitment. So much like the conversation you would have with the child in your house who wants to buy the dog, or wants to take something home from the SPCA. We're not talking about a year. We're not talking about a day. We're going to be managing this for 20 or 30 years. And so do we have the resources to do that? And how does that addition impact the resources that we have available to manage that which we already own and already have usufruct and responsibility over as the stewards of these assets? So that's the long and the short of it. The PhD really pushed me to think differently, to sharpen my tools, and it's part of the reason I moved over to GFOA, to be able to have a wider conversation and not just think about this from a single point agency perspective or a single point government perspective.
Well, that is so good. And it warms our hearts knowing that someone who is focused in, high level thinking turns to asset management as a solution. And I agree with what you have laid out there. And it's so good working with you on programs such as asset management policy, which is what we're going to be doing on the 29th with Earl Campbell and David Topman. It's been a really neat collaboration where you wanted to do something and the Asset Leadership Network said, well, here's some things that we have, some pieces. And you said, well, I think it's really important to have David Totman, who is an ALN senior fellow and is the American Society of Civil Engineers liaison to the US ISO Technical Advisory Group, to talk about the scorecard for US infrastructure, the problems we are having. And everyone understands the problems, but it really drives it home. This is why we need to do asset management. And then Earl Jackson at the Denver City and County Department of Transportation and Infrastructure had worked with the ALN to help bring his team up to speed on how to advance an asset management culture. And his team had seen the ALN present at a GFOA event. And so he brought us in. We did an executive briefing that went well. And they said, what do we do next? And we recommended a policy briefing to help them get started on a policy. And that's what they did. And they're feeling the value of it, because everything you said, for it to work, has to be based on a policy. Because then, depending on changes, it doesn't matter. The organization has a policy of asset management.
Yeah, I think the Denver example is a good one in that, well, in three ways. One, it is as a friend of mine in this work says, no one is in the right or the wrong place on this journey. It's important to know where you're at on the journey in terms of asset management, but no one's in the right or the wrong place. Meaning, if you haven't done anything yet, then it's the, best day to plant the tree. There's two of them 20 years ago and today. So the best thing you can do is start your journey. And wherever you are on the journey, you're solving some things and you're finding some things that need more work and more resolution as you go. And so I think where Denver's at, which is interesting to me, and they're going to talk about this a little bit on the 29th, where Denver is at is that I think they've really done some good work to evolve kind of into a version 2.0, their asset management plan. They've codified some things in policies that different people had different opinions on. And so they've codified the standard of how they're going to choose to behave in this work. But I think the thing that I found interesting in the conversations was that from a capital planning perspective, they haven't gone all the way into their CIP and said we are going to positively privilege and positively name that which we already own as the most important pieces of our asset investment. They're still having the competition of existing assets with new infrastructure, and so I think their policies will be an important tool to then inform the matrix. So I think they're at an interesting point in their journey. I think the second piece that I found interesting in the conversation is inside of their plan, they're coming to places where they can articulate better the deficits. So it's not just a series of red light, green light dashboards, because then you can fall into a trap where, because it looks pretty good overall, we feel pretty good overall, even though what's doing really good is curbs and what's doing really poorly is bridges, right? I think they've come to a place where they can start to articulate where the big dollars live and what that asset deficit actually is, and can articulate what needs to be done to start to solve that asset deficit. And I think, combining one and two, thinking about how they continue to use those policies to move assets into being a positive part of a matrices that privileges those assets in a CIP context. As they come to a place where they can really articulate the deficit and show that deficit versus just a really light touch red, yellow, green dashboard. I think the final piece then will be for them to have an articulation about what are the can't fail assets that we have. So for any given city, any given jurisdiction, we can look at the forest and get really concerned with the forest without remembering that there are 3 or 4 trees that can't go away. Health and safety, things like electricity, water, the basic public goods that are have to haves and not nice to haves. And so I think that's the third piece, where they come out of a policy where they privilege that which they already own. They really do a good job of speaking to the deficit, but then they don't spread the money too thin to really not focus on a place where it is absolutely more important. And that being most important, then starts to bring you into concert slash competition with other departments. But that's where I think a cross government matrix is really helpful because you're trying to make like decisions, even though it's pretty disparate infrastructure. You're trying to make like decisions based on the those three criteria. Where does the deficit really live? What do we already own? Where's the deficit really live, and what is the can't fail assets? So I think Denver now has a lot of the really important pieces to begin to have all three of those conversations. So it's exciting to watch someone on that journey that's really moving in a positive direction. And I look forward to the conversation. And then you touched on the other piece of that. I mean, the work that the American Society of Civil Engineers does is every 4 years they basically give a scorecard to us. And I think this is one of the more complicated and interesting scorecards that they will have done in some time because of the 4 years we just lived through, where there was a lot of discretionary federal money that was out there through the ARPA funds and the ESSER funds for schools and all of the discretionary funds that came through in the COVID funding and IIJA, ERA, some of the prescribed funding that I think people are going to be a little surprised because that funding was so prescribed. It may have done really important infrastructure work that may not have moved the needle on our scorecards. And so I think it'll be interesting to see and I hope that part of the lesson that comes from this, if the numbers are what I think they're going to be, and I haven't seen them, so I'm guessing and speculating. But if the numbers haven't done all that we thought we would do with a couple of $1 trillion that invested, then what I hope is that focuses the multiple layers and levels of government from local and county to state and federal to really start to focus any investment into the deficits so we can bring our existing infrastructure up to a level of service that it needs to be for us to move out of those lower grades and into those upper grades. Because I think on the basic red, yellow, green of the scorecard that the ASC has done for years, we've not been passing. We're not on honor roll in many cases, and so I think there's some
Most.
serious work that needs to be done. And I hope every 4 years they give us a scorecard, and I hope it refocuses us.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that. Um, it has been very good talking with David and Earl about what's going to be said. I almost wish we had recorded some of our planning sessions because we could almost write a small article based on all of this discussion going on. Um, David thinks that our scores aren't going to go up because, for example, in water, there was $50 billion for water systems, but the report has been saying that 800 billion a year is needed, or 800 billion is needed over 4 years. The 50 billion is a drop in the bucket. So that's why we think that maybe the scores won't budge that much, unfortunately. And what I hope is seen is that asset management mindset sets in. People realize it's not just money that's going to solve the problem. We need to change our culture. And that is shifting from the ribbon cutting to maintaining existing.
I think we need to shift our culture. I think also one of the things that I don't know how they do it in this version of the scorecard, but I hope it's there. I think there's also uh, a shift in thinking that needs to happen relative to um, resiliency. And I think some of these numbers, and this is where the finance comes in. If I'm doing 30-year bonds, the asset better last for 30 years. If we're financing this across time, I can't have one version of it fail and need to pay for a second version of it. And I think there's some real questions about some uh, uh, historic infrastructure, and where we've located that historic infrastructure, and if that historic infrastructure needs to move. I think about water systems placed in low-lying areas near rivers. I think about some of the water sensitive airports that we have in this country. I think about some of the pump stations and maybe uh, systems level equipment that goes into being part of larger delivery system for a public good. All of those need consideration, and I think that that number is not going to go down even with investment, because I think there are points in time where there are just large scale investments that need to happen. A bridge being replaced, a bridge being moved. Certainly, if ever we wanted to close our eyes and pretend the world does not let us. We're a year out from Baltimore, where a bridge got hit, things that you can't see. And so those are expensive moments where you have to replace an asset as we're going. So again, I don't think that there's some causality inside of that in terms of a jurisdiction should have been thinking differently about the asset. I think that where the causality comes in is that causes that number to grow. That number is never going to shrink. Well, never is a very long time. It would take a lot of investment to get that number to shrink. And as we shrink that number on the assets that are worth investing in, we're also going to have to make some decisions about assets that probably need to be replaced, which is going to be the cost for replacement is always going to be higher than the cost for renewal. Um, so I think that number is not going to go down, and I think that there are a lot of conditions. I mean, our dear friends, and I hold them, as we talk, have an asset and a infrastructure conversation. It's impossible not to think about our friends in Altadena and Pacific Palisades and in Southern California, who are going to be replacing all of the infrastructure for a community writ large. And so there's decisions that are going to be made about where that goes and how that gets. So I just don't think costs are going to go down at any time soon.
No, no. So we are in alignment in our thinking about the holistic nature. We are in alignment in our thinking that it's a cultural issue and we need to use the cold hard facts of the data represented in a way that people can make decisions on them. How can we work together going into the future? We've had a great relationship so far, but in our closing minutes here, what ways can the ALN help you achieve your mission?
It's a good question, Michael. So I think, this idea that we live with an asset deficit is starting to come home to a place where it can't be ignored anymore. And so, we're going to have to deal with this, and there's a walk in between federal rules promulgation, state rules promulgation, and local adoption that will meet somewhere out in front of us. It could be a year, it could be a decade, but at some point there are going to be stronger rules about requiring better asset management at the local level, and that will be um, uh, uh, imparted and put on cities and governments. And so my hope is that we can, with organizations like ALN, and others, continue to push the idea of adoption. Because if a community is adoption, it has early, is an early adopter, and that adoption just has to be modified to meet a standard. It's a lot easier than going from the standing start and not having an asset inventory, not having a basic inventory that you've been able to do some scoring and some condition assessment around. So I think for every step that a community takes and the work that groups like yourself and others are doing to convince localities that this is a good idea, everything we can do to get them down the road will have them better set for the day when the rule promulgation comes in and has them adopting a standard. And it will have them better equipped to say, this is what we want to see in the standard, and this is what we think would be helpful as they are being called into and asked to be part of a rule promulgation at their local or more regional state level. So
Spoken
I
like
think
a
just a continued
very
conversation.
spoken like a very good tag member. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. I actually hadn't even thought of it like that. But the bigger the community contributing to the standards, the more effective they will be.
I
Well,
look at some of the comments in the chat. The once in a lifetime investment uh, is an interesting concept. The asset management in perpetuity. This is where investing in existing infrastructure is never going to be politically expedient. And so I think, uh, President Biden, I think as a federal leader has some luxury to say that it's never the sexy thing to do as the mayor, to get the city out of fiscal distress, to get the city investing in the right ways and in the right places. It's never going to be politically sexy or expedient. And yet, we need to do a better job of convincing our leaders this is exactly what they should be doing, because that's the generational gift that they can give to have a city that is highly functional. You go back to that. I'll close with this. You go back to old John Locke, wherever you took for freshman philosophy at whatever fantastic liberal arts university you may have attended. Go back to your freshman philosophy class, and John Locke said that it is not our job to hand a generation, the next generation, largesse. It's our job to hand the next generation an equitable, functional government. And so that's what we're aiming to do. Not to hand them a big pot of reserves, not to hand them generational wealth, though that would be nice. What we do need to hand them is a government that can afford itself, that runs well, and that is equitable. And I think there is no better way to measure whether we're doing that well or not, than through the provision of goods as it relates to the system in which we deliver it, which is the assets in every community.
We'll let you have the last word on that one for sure. Thank you so much. This has been, just dynamic discussion. I'm glad we're doing this with Earl and David because it gave us the opportunity to have a more open and free-flowing discussion leading up to it. And thank you to all of our attendees. And
Thanks especially to my friend Mark. I see him in the comments. It's nice to see your name, Mark.
yes, Mr. Mark DeClerc. And Nick, if you can bring us home, that would be great.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kyle. That was an incredible discussion, and we're grateful every time you are here with us. And I'm sure we'll have to have you back maybe after this event, see what other thoughts were sparked. And thank you to everyone who stuck around. Thanks to our patron members, Jacobs, Manteca, Manuma, and ABS Quality Evaluations and CGI, as well as all our organizational members for helping us have programs like this, for sending members and doing important work out in the world to support infrastructure and an equitable future for everyone. And please join us next week and in our future events. We have an upcoming Water Asset Leadership Roundtable series, starting with Palm Beach County, Florida next week, and continuing with an EPA Water Asset Management Framework on the 30th, and then a February 6th AI Asset Management Assessment Tool. So we have a bunch of upcoming programs, and we're hoping to see all of you there. With that,
Stay warm, everyone.
thanks,
Bye for
Kyle.
now.
You get it. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Mike.